a Manitoba health economist who uncovered the effects of the 1970s Mincome experiment on health and well-being. And so Evelyn is here with a lot of experience for us. Welcome, Evelyn Forget. We also have Sheila Regehr. She's the chairperson and founding member of the Basic Income Canada Network, and the person I've spoken to most is preparing for this. So wonderful to meet you, and I'm sure we're going to hear so much from you. Welcome, Sheila. And I think the man who might win the award, at least for the longest drive, I'm assuming you didn't drive in from Manitoba, we have Schlakman, who has just driven up from Baltimore as in overnight. So Ian, it's wonderful to see you. He said it was a nice drive. He is from Basic Income Action, National Welfare Rights, and the Poor People's Campaign in the United States, and a candidate for Governor of Maryland. So it's so great to have you here as well. So to keep it nice and simple, I'm just going to ask the panel to go from left over there, my right, across here, and just pass the microphone along after they've given 45 minutes, however long they want, to explain the path that they got here. Because I think that's where we really get to understand what kind of questions we can ask them later. So please, Guy, go ahead.
Hello everyone. Great to be here. I know some of you from the last year and a half I spent. Quickly, I'm the Member of Parliament for Rimouski, Regehr, Misquata, Basque, which is not the longest name in the House of Commons. You might know Rimouski as a second home at Cinecross. I've got a very large riding, 8,000 square kilometers, going from the St. Lawrence River to the borders of Maine and New Brunswick. I'm also the parliamentary leader of the NABIG. Parliamentary leader because, as many of you know, I ran in the leadership campaign of the NABIG last year. I did a twin, Jamie sang one, and Jamie decided, because he doesn't have a seat in the Commons, to name me as the leader, basically, in the House of Commons until such time as he gets a seat. And that's relevant because basically the campaign is where I put basic income front and foremost in terms of the policy to be discussed, to hopefully be, it will be eventually adopted as an entity policy and hopefully adopted by this country as a whole. We have 45 minutes, just now. 4 to 5 minutes, right?
4 to
5 minutes, not 45 minutes. I just want to tell you the story of how I got interested in basic income. I'm an economist, so I'm a policy one. I have a lot of policies. And in this case, we had a convention in Edmonton where we had between 12 and 15 resolutions, all on basic income. So it was clear that it was of interest to our members. The thing is, all those resolutions were talking about so many different things that we could not even start agreeing on what it was. So I decided to start putting together some research for caucus, because caucus obviously has a stake in this, and we have different positions in caucus as well. We have strong proponents, and Evelyn comes to mind. We have people who want to know more about this. Some people who are wary of it because they see it as a conservative idea, which is something that we hear of. So I put together a presentation on what it was. So I went through the literature. I think the most useful piece, there's been many interesting pieces, but the most interesting was a CCPA study, where basically all the different models were put together. I updated the study, tried to see how much it would be, and tried to get caucus to get some agreement on where we wanted to go. I was not that successful, but at least I started the discussion within caucus, and obviously that discussion went on with the leadership race. And I found it quite interesting because during the leadership race, and I'll end on this, is where I've seen how, I won't say controversial, but how hotly debated the topic is within the progressive left. I had to fight, not against conservatives, but against progressive on this idea. And I do remember Sheila was there, the panel I did with Josephine Green, the chef Josephine is here, but she'll be here this weekend. Opposed to John Clark of the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty and Jessica, the last name from OPSU. And basically, they were opposing the idea because it was, in their sense, a commodification of social services. It doesn't have to be. You can't make basic income what it should be on the progressive perspective. And this is why we need to come to
why a basic income was better than the way we currently delivered income systems. And I was particularly interested in that for a couple of reasons. My father died when I was 12. My mother found herself with 3 young children and no job skills, as was very typical for somebody like my mother during those years. And she raised us on mother's allowance and later a whole series of not very well-paying jobs. And I learned I don't want to give the impression that I grew up in poverty, because I certainly didn't, but I learned pretty quickly how important money was. And suddenly I was sitting in this economics class and it was telling me what I actually knew to be true. Money's an incredibly powerful thing. Money of your own is an especially powerful thing. And it's really important if you're a woman. And so this just struck home. I switched my major, I studied economics. I went on to graduate school where economics was a lot less fun than it was as an undergraduate. I finally got a PhD. I got a job in Winnipeg and I discovered that some of my new colleagues had worked on this project that was being conducted way out west somewhere. And it had sort of fallen off the radar and nobody was thinking about it anymore. About 15 years ago, I was recruited from the economics department to the medical school. And in the medical school, an economist only has one job, basically, and that's trying to get a handle on healthcare costs, how we can make this system sustainable. And when you look at the data over and over and over again, it doesn't matter what health outcome you're looking at, there's this huge gradient. The poorer you are, the sicker you are. It doesn't matter whether you're looking at life expectancy or birth outcomes or chronic diseases, it doesn't matter, it's the same all the time. And so that was coming out of the data very clearly. My office is actually at the Health Sciences Center, which is a downtown hospital in Winnipeg, and it serves a very large low-income population. And when you walk through the hallways or go into the cafeteria, go into the clinics and start chatting to people, you realize very quickly that a whole lot of healthcare resources are treating the consequences of poverty. They're not treating, nobody is in the Health Sciences Center because they went to Bali on vacation and got some weird infection. They're in there because they've spent years living in inadequate housing, eating poor diets, working at really crappy jobs, living with the stress of trying to feed their kids. We spend money very, very inefficiently. We spend money in the healthcare system mopping up the consequences of poverty. And so I wondered whether it might not be more efficient to give people the money up front so they could deal with the poverty instead of waiting for the poverty to make them sick and then trying to keep them alive. And so I went looking for the data that was collected from the old income experiment, and I've spent a good deal of time going through that data and trying to find out what the health consequences of basic income are. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, 14 years ago, I became a senator, and I decided that I was going to focus my work on social justice issues. Hugh Siegel and I, we were both members of the same committee, the Social Affairs Committee, which I continue to chair. And we put together a report, In From the Margins, a call to action on poverty, housing, and homelessness. We looked at all different dimensions to it, all the different kinds of challenges that people face. And we came up with a long series of recommendations. And one of them was to further the issue of basic income, to look at it still further. At that point in time, that was in 2009, there still wasn't a lot of talk about it. I am delighted to see the kind of momentum that we have today, the kind of momentum that's coming out of this pilot project here in Ontario, the fact that it's getting more talked about than ever before. People are picking up on basic income, basic income. They see it as a way to end what is a failed system, a failed social and economic system in our country, one that degrades people, that marginalizes people. People are looking for change. And I think the persistence of poverty is, for me, the key issue. Because poverty, there's a lot of well-intentioned people, a lot of programs that people put in place, governments put in place to help. well, you know, you make a step forward, then comes another government that has austerity programs at the top of their agenda, and so we make a step backward. We still today have 1 in 7 Canadians living in poverty in this country. 1 million of them are children. How is this possible in such a rich country as this, that this can continue to happen? So, you know, in our examination over the years, we came to the conclusion we had to do something radically different. We needed to change the path we were on, that the present system was not going to serve our needs. So the persistence of poverty is part of it. And you know, incrementalism I don't think works. A lot of people have talked about making change in this program or changes in that program, but overall we still have too much poverty, and it's time to end poverty in this very rich country we have. It's also time to reduce the inequality that we have in Canada. Tell me when my 5 minutes is up. I keep going on for a long time. It's time to, you know, the inequality, the rising inequality in this country is also a very key factor that we need to look at. And thirdly is the changing labor market. Wayne Bluchuk knows that very well from his work on precarious employment. And you know, we're seeing new kinds of automation now in terms of robotics and artificial intelligence. So those are 3 key reasons that I think it's time to change course. Now, basic income isn't going to solve all our problems. We still need social support programs. We're still going to need affordable housing, child care, training and employment services for people, services for the disabled, for seniors, and many other parts of our population that are even worse off than the general numbers we keep hearing. You know, our indigenous population, people of racial minorities, disabled and others, single mothers. The kinds of poverty levels that exist in those communities are even higher. So we've got a lot of work to do, and I'm grateful to see that this momentum is continuing, and we're going to keep it going until we get a national basic income program in Canada.
Thank you. As expected, you passionately disappointed. Let's hear from Sheila. Sheila, what was your path to get here?
So in thinking about this, I actually decided that I think my whole life was a path to get here, and I can't talk about all of that. So I am going to talk a little more personally, though, about a story that I think very much influences why I'm here and what I'm doing now. So I'm going to go back in history a little bit, too. In the early 80s, I was a but delivering federal programs, administering federal programs that were full of holes. So, like Guy, I think I was born with policy wonk stamped on my forehead. I decided, like, I couldn't keep doing this. I had to have a policy job. So the way to do that was to go back to school. And so I ended up, because of the circumstances, and I didn't realize this until recently, I got a basic income by luck. At that time, in Ontario, family benefits was kind of like a kinder version of social assistance. Less intrusive, and you could get student loans at the same time. So that's what I did. It became illegal shortly afterwards, but that's what I did. So I had my basic income, I went to graduate school. In this program, you have not like a work term, but a practicum kind of thing. So I had a federal job during that period of time. Some of those practicums are paid, some aren't. They offered me, it's federal government, very good money for that term, but it was 3 months. And I was very aware that I was lucky and that your luck doesn't last forever. And if I had started to report income, I would have come to somebody's attention. And I would have had to start filing paperwork. And I was up to here raising kids and my studies. I didn't need any more paperwork. So essentially, I had a basic income for, I think, about a year from anybody once I was signed up, until I wrote them a letter saying I have a full-time job, thank you, goodbye. So, and then the next little part of this story, a little fast forward, I got a policy job, and I got a policy job working in fields of income security and taxation. And And I discovered, so here's the North American part of the story, we're moving along. I discovered that my ex-husband and I were both paying tax to our respective governments on our child support payments. And I went, what? And then I realized that the Americans, I know this sounds weird, they did it better. So through a long, complicated series of things that took about 4 years, there was a family law review, there was a review of the tax treatment of child support, and the solution to some of these things wound into the child benefit, which is a form of basic income that's now serving a lot of people. So my takeaways from this were, first of all, that I had this basic income by accident, and it really worked, or I wouldn't have been able to fulfill the things that I was really good at. And secondly, I had this audacious idea that I actually changed tax policy, and we can do it again.
I can tell I was an American. That's the American flag tag. Donald Trump makes us wear these now. How's everyone doing tonight?
Pretty good.
Happy you made it.
Can I just see a show of hands real quick? Who here is from the U.S.? Okay, yes. All flattering. And everyone else from Canada? Yes. Okay. I just wanted to check. So I'm Ian Schlakman, and I guess I started getting more involved with basic income and the basic income community back in 2014. I, on a lark, sort of ran for Congress against Doug Ruppersberger, this American congressman who essentially said Edward Snowden was a traitor and I was a tech guy, and I got really mad at him for saying that. I think he was a hero. And I said, you know what, I'm going to run for office. I know more about technology than this guy. And I debated him, and it was great. It was wonderful. It was an amazing experience. And we put out all this really bold policy. So I love the theme, bold policy, practical solutions. And one of the things that really picked up and took off was basic income. And to me, basic income was something that was discussed years ago with Martin Luther King. And so to see people rally around it so firmly, so strongly, I was just shocked. And then I discovered the basic income community. And here I am years later. But one of the things that I really want to point out, and one of the things that kept me going in the community, is that I'm an activist. You know, I have a day job, and then during the evening I'm going out and I'm protesting all kinds of different things. And I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, and there is quite a bit to protest if you're following what's going on in Baltimore, Maryland. Our mayor is shutting down public housing. Our police force is wildly out of control, really criminally out of control police force. There's not really a lot being done about it. So there is just so much to protest, it's unbelievable. But one of the things that I found interesting was that there was a lot of friction between the existing groups that were championing welfare rights, between groups that were championing more liberal issues and basic income, because they felt it would be a threat to the small amount of money that they're getting. So I really found a home in the community, kind of making sure that that friction went away. So I got involved with Basic Income Action. We created a group that focuses on doing actions around basic income. And then I got involved with National Welfare Rights, which is literally the national welfare rights group that existed back in the 60s that marched with Martin Luther King. That group is now resurging itself. A lot of the old-timers that actually marched in the original Poor People's Campaign are now resurging that group. And it's incredibly powerful work. My running mate for governor, and I'm running with the Green Party, just so people know. The Green Party in America is all activists, you know, so, which is great, I love it. She is a strong, fierce activist. Reverend Annie Chambers, look her up. She's marched with Martin Luther King. She was as she calls herself, a disciple of Reverend Malcolm X. That's what she calls him. She is just an absolutely amazing, fierce fighter who's still going strong for her community down there in Baltimore. And one of the things that she constantly tells me is that we've got to keep the community together That's why we're working on the Poor People's Campaign together. I'm not formally involved with the Poor People's Campaign other than through national welfare rights. I do want to make that clear. But, you know, having a refocusing in the U.S. on poor people's issues, on eradicating poverty, and bringing basic income back into the forefront for the government to understand this, Republican, Democrat, Green, Libertarian, whatever, is so pivotal. Because right now, I don't think it's reached full criteria, full capacity in the U.S. So we do have a bit of work to do. That's why I'm kind of in awe when I come over here to you all in Canada, because it's amazing the work that you're doing. Please keep it up. I hope to learn a lot this weekend, because I want to take some of these home to America.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm sure you enjoyed, along with me, hearing the different paths that have taken you all to this place. It's fascinating. And because the theme of this conference is bold ideas, we all can hear from you your passion for basic income, that you're all bold in your own ways. Pathfinders always are. You've got to cut the path. What I want to get to, though, are some of the practical solutions, because I think that's what will bring this forward. So I want to ask you, from your experience promoting basic income and the education and the awareness around it, what do you see as the biggest obstacles, and what can be done about them? Let's get right down to the meat of the issue. So I see a big smile from Evelyn. So Evelyn, I'm going to start with you. I always look for the biggest grin.
I have an expressive face, sorry about that. I think one of the biggest obstacles we face is that there are a lot of interests. There are a lot of competing interests. There are a lot of interests in existing programs. And I think, you know, it's nice to sit back and in a very theoretical and superior way suggest that we all benefit from basic income. But a lot of people have egos and careers and all kinds of things based on the current system. And so I think one of the biggest obstacles we have to face is that there really are a lot of interests in the existing system, which makes it hard to change.
Excellent point. Guy, did you want to?
I'd say from the experience I had during those leadership races and debating this with progressives, it's really the myths that are surrounding basic income. Basically, the myths, I told you about the idea that basic income doesn't need to bring commodification of social services. It can be in addition to what we have in social services. I think basic income doesn't mean that we'll see an end to Medicare, to our healthcare system. It doesn't mean that we'll see the end of, and Art actually mentioned all the social services that we have. It doesn't. But that's not the only myth. There were other myths that we were confronted, and some of them were from progressives, some from conservatives as well, some from the media. For example, one point that came to me, or what was submitted to me over and over again was, well, if you're giving money, then basically what it will amount to is a subsidy for low-wage employers. Because why would Walmart increase its wages, and how could we be successful in raising the wages at Walmart if they have basic income that will actually raise their standard of living? My point is, it won't. It will be the opposite effect. If you're providing, the model I was proposing, by the way, for those who might not know, is that I was suggesting to basically use the tax system that we have and the structure we have in place, such as the child benefit, for example, to provide to all those who don't reach with either their support, government support, or in income, they don't reach the low-income cutoff, which is a measure of money, would actually provide monthly benefits that will bring them to that level. So try to imagine that you have so many people right now who are forced to work at minimum wage. And if minimum wage is, if we have the basic income in place, what it will give is the power, the freedom to people who currently are forced to work at minimum wage to actually choose something else, to choose to go back to school, to choose to train or have different training. What this will do is to bring down the number of people who are desperate enough to get a minimum wage job, and forcing those low-income or low-wage employers to consider to increase their wages to attract labor. So all those myths, this is only two of them, and there's plenty of others, is basically are basically obstacles because they are bringing us back to what is comfortable, what we have right now. Change is very dangerous. We know conservatives traditionally and by definition don't like change, but progressives don't like change either. And this is what I discovered. This was really an eye-opener during the leadership race, and this is our challenge, to make people challenge their own preconceptions about what type of society we could have and what the benefits of fighting income inequality differently would be in this country.
I can see Art leaning in.
Well, I agree with E about myths. There are a lot of them. And for example, the right thinks it's a left plot, the left thinks it's a right plot. There is a very immense lack of understanding on the part of the general public of what basic income entails. There are people that think, well, there's people going to sit around, collect a lot of money and do nothing. There's other people that say, well, look at all these costs, it's going to cost us billions and billions of dollars. By the way, the PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Office, came up with a great report recently and showed it isn't a big cost at all. But nevertheless, that's a side thing. But I think we've got to get a greater understanding. We all have to do some missionary work here, get a better understanding of the population of what it is and what it isn't. Now, what it is and what it isn't has to be settled too, because there are variables on the design of a basic income. So we've got to talk a little bit more about that, what we think might work here. But we've got to get out and get people to understand that giving people a hand up will make a big difference in their lives. It will put them in a better place, a better foundation, a better platform to be able to move forward in their lives, whether it's moving forward with education or moving forward with employment. A lot of people still want to work. People don't want to contribute to society in one way or another. They want to work in one way or another. It may not always be for a lot of money. Maybe some people will do things in the community, volunteer work or whatever, but you know, people want to do useful things and contribute to society. We've got to get the messaging out there, because that messaging is important for another thing. It's called political will. If we want to get our governments to move on basic income, we've got to create the political will. And it starts with the people getting a better understanding and pushing all of their politicians at all levels to get that political will.
Just before I pass along the microphone to the next speaker, some of you might have seen that I picked up my phone, and yes, I am tweeting. And I'm doing that because you brought up my favorite word in the whole world, probably next to communication, which is messaging. And getting that message out can start right now in this moment. So if you are engaged on social media, which I know some of you are, now's the time. You know, quote what you're hearing, challenge the perceptions, tweet the hashtag if you're on Twitter. And Hamilton has a very robust Twitter community, and I noticed the promotion for this conference was pretty active. So by all means, the hashtag is NABIG, so NABIG 2018. And please go on your platforms and keep the conversation going live as we do this. Sheila.
The technophone. Go to business media stuff. Yeah, it's hard for me to think about what the biggest challenges are. I think for me, I mean, based on my experience and the things that I've been working in, I would identify two as my contribution. The first continues on Art's point, I think, about work. And I've spent decades within government working with Statistics Canada on collecting information on time use, on what people do with their time. And they work. It's not all paid. Work is not the same thing as employment. People are overworked now. People living in low income are more overworked than anyone. So this whole notion of what work means, but it's really psychologically embedded. I mean, when we were working with Statistics Canada and we were, you know, testing questions, they would go out and they would send out these surveys to women, and the women, they couldn't bring themselves to check the box saying, I work. It's, no, I care for my children. I love my children. And my response was, like, washing dirty diapers is still work. I'm sorry. You know? So this idea that we've narrowed this idea of work to an insane level, that work is not just employment, but it's employment for somebody else, for somebody else's purpose, and that our lives should be defined by that. So I think that one's really hard to break, especially when employment is becoming precarious and people's identities are being threatened. I think the other one is, I mean, we've been through 40 years of neoliberal austerity, scale back, protect your turf, and I think this affects organizations in the community as much as anybody. So I thought, I mean, there used to be in the women's movement, for example, much more collaboration. There was much greater ability for people to network and to get together. And through a lot of cutbacks, a lot of that capacity has been weakened. And I see it starting to rebuild again now, and I think that's encouraging. But a lot of the structures that fund that kind of civil society work, foundations and governments, various orders of governments, are not quite ready to do anything out of the box. And they consider this out of the box. I don't, but many do.
You know, basic income action, someone works with, the social worker works with us. Her name is Diane Asian, some of you know her. And she has this wonderful, lengthy, detailed slideshow on temporary assistance for needy families. And she shows how the money for this one particular social program goes to churches that put up giant billboards that say, marriage works, get married today. And so little of it actually goes into actually giving temporary assistance to needy families. But you know, messaging is really important, and the political will is incredibly important. And so it's about we have to tackle it both ways. We have to tackle it from a practical perspective. And I'll just be frank with you, I'm a socialist. And I've seen too many solid socialist proposals, like basic income in my opinion, that people just dismiss as outright, you know, spendthrift or, you know, too expensive. And in America, it's even worse because we don't even have single-payer healthcare or socialized medicine. So there's really, you know, we're very averse to giving away free stuff, so to speak. But I just want to share with you a quick story. So myself and Reverend Chambers, my running mate, we were at a town hall at a senior center last Tuesday night. And someone asked us about this recent court case in Maryland. So a judge in Maryland, for the second time, found that Maryland public colleges had intentionally racially segregated the school system for years, the public college system in Maryland. And the ruling was that $1 billion was due to what are called historically black colleges in Maryland. Now, our governor was a Republican, and our attorney general was a Democrat, decided to appeal this. And this outrage, we were at a public forum and someone asked us about this. And they said, how dare you not want to appeal this decision? That's $1 billion. How dare you want to let it go through? And I said, what are you talking about? And they said, well, it's $1 billion. Where are we going to get the money from? And I was like, you know, well, you're going to spend money appealing it. And I'm thinking in these very small terms. And Reverend Chambers shot up and said, how dare you question that money? We finally got a judge to say that the black community is due this money, that it was deprived, that our schools are racially segregated, which is completely illegal and unconstitutional, and you're sitting here arguing about nickels and dimes. This is a racial rights issue for us. How dare you do this? And it really took me aback, because even myself, I get these narrow terms of where are we going to get the money from? Where is this going to happen from? But if you don't start somewhere, and in America we need to start somewhere, and basic income could definitely be that starting place, and it's practical.
Wow, thank you. And to all of you. So we've heard that the obstacles include myths. We've heard that they include political will. We've heard that there are other people who benefit from the current system, and so they'd be adverse to any kind of change. And even that...
And this is actually the word of the whole term, to say it's an unconditional basic income basically for everyone and not only for the poor people. So I would like to know how you think about unconditionality.
Well, thank you for coming from Germany, and we've got Guy. Everyone wants to answer that one, so go ahead.
In the model I proposed during the leadership race, I studied, of course, the issue of basic income. I don't think politically we can actually go and say we can have a universal one, saying that we'll give, say, $18,000, $20,000 a year to everyone. Most people are talking about $1,200 a month universally, because even if you take into account the effect of the tax system, and if you're scrapping all social programs, which I don't think would be a good idea, and if you're looking at all the people that will be on the street because we're going to give them a basic income instead of a job in managing the social programs, it would still cost between 160 to $200 billion. The current Canadian budget right now is $290 billion. So basically having a universal system of basic income would require basically raising taxes by about 60%, and probably even more than that. So what I proposed wasn't a universal model, but that always, like the principle to fight income inequality is to ensure that no one would be under or below the poverty level, which is defined in my model as the low income cutoff, which varies depending on not only on the family size, but also the city you're in. Living standards, or the cost of living is actually higher in Toronto than it would be in, say, Guelph, for example. So the low income cutoff takes that into account. If it's not universal, what I was proposing was unconditional. And that, to me, is the key for basic income. Unconditional means it doesn't matter that you're going to work or not. It doesn't matter that you're in school or not. It doesn't matter how old you are. Like, there is no condition put into it. The state government is not asking you to do anything for it. We're just ensuring that no one in society is under the level of poverty. And so, rather than talking and arguing should be universal or not, and then we have to think of how can we actually pay for it. You have to ensure that it's unconditional so that we're removing all the obstacles to ensure the elimination of poverty.
Great, thank you. Senator?
Well, I'd like to focus on the word universal. I agree with what you just said, unconditional, and I mean that's one of the problems we have in the present system, that people have to go through the indignities of lining up and being interviewed all the time for getting their welfare allowances, etc. That's something we want to get rid of, and so I certainly agree with what Guy says. But the word universal is a little bit different here. If we're talking about universally available to all people at the poverty line, below the poverty line, to bring them up or prevent people from getting into poverty, well, that's okay, but that's not generally what that word means. Now, a few weeks ago, I was watching a debate that was being held, I think, in New York, and it was on a question of whether universal basic income would become the social safety net of the future. At the beginning of the debate, they had an audience. They took a poll, and a slight plurality of the numbers there thought that basic income, universal basic income, was a good idea. The majority were undecided going into this. So they had the debate. It raged on for a couple of hours, and then at the end, they took another poll. The almost 2/3 majority against basic income. Well, what happened? Well, what happened in between, there was a lot of discussion about what universal was meant, and a lot of people did not like the idea that rich people were going to get this as well, people that didn't need it. They could understand people keeping people out of poverty, raising people out of poverty, preventing them from falling into poverty, but they had a hard time coming to an agreement that, in fact, everybody should get it. And I think in Canada, the system that we're working on in terms of the Ontario pilot, what has been done in other places as well in pilot projects, would indicate that our best bet for getting basic income implemented here is to talk about what is sometimes referred to as a negative income tax or a refundable credit, a monthly kind of payment that would help to bring people up or prevent them from getting into poverty. It's a topping up kind of thing. So I think that's the better route to go, and that's why I don't use the word universal.
Yeah, could you, I think you go ahead, Sheila.
Yeah, I think each country context is going to be a little bit different. I think if all of us sat around in the room, it probably would be easier to construct a basic income from scratch rather than figuring out how to get there from here. So here is different in each place. In Canada, I mean, because we have an understanding that we have universal health care, but it doesn't mean that Evelyn and Guy and I are all going to get heart surgery when the three of us don't all need it. So it's very proportionate to what you actually require. And we have a tax system that's structured that allows us to work that way. I just see Jürgen de Vispeler came in, who has some connection to the Finnish experiment. And from my understanding, I mean, one of the things that the Ontario government is doing is something that Finland can't do yet in terms of the design of its program, and it's because of the differences in tax systems. So, you know, each country is going to be a little bit different, and then you have the issue of political feasibility. I mean, some things will just sell places better than others. And in my experience, usually if it feels comfortable and it feels like something that you know, you're going to be able to sell it better.
So yeah, that's such a great point for me to jump off on, because that, in America, means testing is, because it can be done differently in each state, it's used in incredibly cruel ways. So I can't say that I would be, it has to be universal. When we're fighting for it, we have to be talking about a universal basic income, in the sense that it just has to be the way it is. I don't want to speak for other countries, obviously. But I do want to say that in America, I think there is enough money to go around. I just think we're spending it in the wrong way. And I'll leave it at that high level. But I also want to point out, my first time that I was at a basic income conference back in 2015, I believe, I was on a panel with Brazilian Senator Eduardo Suplicy. Thank you so much. The basic income community comes up again. And you know, he fought so hard in the Brazilian Senate to make sure universal was a part of it. And yeah, people were outraged that someone who was so to the left, and maybe even the self-described radical, was wanting to give unconditional income to people that could be billionaires. But it's just, when you put the means test in there, really cruel things can happen on a local and a state level, and we're seeing that already in the States. So that's why I want to go the other way.
Evelyn, did you want to weigh in on this question before Art responds again?
I guess the only thing to add to what's already been said, in the Canadian case, I don't think people are indifferent to the size of government, and I think I agree with Art and Guy that in order to have a universal basic income, it means a very large expansion of both tax revenue and government expenditure.
Did you want to add one more thing to this question?
I just want to say one thing. I would never advocate a means test. What we're talking about in this country, we do have means tests now for welfare. An income test is different from a means test. And an income test that in fact is carried out by the Canada Revenue Agency or the Income Tax Authority, which is all kept in private, I think helps to reduce any stigma.
Okay, let's get to another question. We've got one.
I have one.
Sorry. Oh, you got one? Thank you, Courtney. We'll get to you next, Jen.
Hello, I'm Joan. I'm from Hamilton. I'm a strong supporter of a guaranteed basic income. I have a couple of questions. One is, how are we going to balance expenditures on guaranteed basic income with expenditures on the creation decades ago that was supposed to solve the problem of family incomes, make it possible for families to pay off their mortgages in 10 years instead of 20 or 30, allow them to save for their old age. And that was the incorporation of women into the paid workforce. And what happened is, in very short order, the main beneficiaries were the developers. The price of housing skyrocketed as you had two incomes chasing after housing that used to be affordable by a family with a single income. And nothing was done really very effectively to control that. I'm hoping that any basic income program would be coupled with a really vigorous program for different levels of government to engage directly in the creation of affordable housing. I'm sick of hearing us beg developers to set aside 10%, 15%, while they continue to gobble up all of the available land in our member states and build, housing that is only affordable for maybe the top 20% of the population. I'd like to remind you that in 9 short years, between 1925 and 1934, the Social Democratic government of Vienna created housing for 220,000 people, and they paid the rent, they were able to pay the rent at 4% of an average worker's wage, and also provide housing for disabled people and unemployed people.
Already do. You go around to different groups. You're sort of like a Pied Piper. You're moving around and a missionary, whatever, to gather people in to understand basic income and to be supportive of it. What you need to do is go a step further. Go see your MP, or go see all the MPs, and go see them regularly. Go see them every year. Go see other political leaders. Sorry?
That's going to be very depressing.
Well, I'm sorry I didn't hear that, but we've got to create political will.
He said it's depressing.
Depressing, I'm sorry. But, you've got to, you go see the MPs, for example, and you start to inform them, educate them, and try to bring them on side, at least to get them to understand some of the issues. And quite frequently they'll go back Wednesday morning, Parliament Hill is when the different parties get together, they caucus, each individually first. And a lot of people can get up in those caucuses with the leadership there and talk about these different issues. And the more you talk about it, the better off. That's just one idea. There's a lot of organizations. I met with some faith leaders this morning. I said the same thing to them. You got these big congregations, get them active, get them interested in this, inform them, and then have them go inform the MPs or MPPs or municipal politicians as well.
Senator, do you want to add to that?
I would like to tell you that I'm really optimistic about what can be done. The problem that we have is the fact, once again, that we're fighting among ourselves on what we can get. Like, we're fighting, should we get universal or not? You're not in favor of universal, I'm not with you. Are we going to go to help people to get to the low-income cutoff, or do we want more? There are people who actually oppose my program because I'm not giving more. I'm just limiting myself to the poverty level. They wanted to see my program to raise everybody to 25,000 or 30,000. We're having this kind of discussion. It's hard to actually build a movement when you don't even agree on the parameters. And we can have respectful differences, but at some point we have to recognize that those are details. They are important details, but they are details. If we don't get all together working towards a basic income and not starting to divide ourselves into small groups because we don't agree with our neighbors' take on that angle or that parameter, then we will not be able to achieve anything like that. And you're from Kingston. I remember meeting with the group in Kingston, and at first you had many problems with the position I brought forward because you wanted a universal program. Robin, by the way, was part of your group, still part of your group, I guess. And you had challenging questions about this. And I told you about the political ramifications of the way to sell it. And we came to an agreement and we worked together. This is the way that we can do it. And you find other politicians who can do it. But let's stop getting bogged down by details and dividing ourselves with such details.
Thank you very much. I think we move on to our final question.
I do want to say, I think we're getting back to, I worry that we're getting back to incrementalism, though, or some of that strategy. And, I can really only speak to my experience in the U.S., but in the U.S. we have to demand this as a right. And I think that goes to what the gentleman over there was saying, because if it's not seen as universal and as a right, you're going, especially in America, you're going to get someone that's going to say, there's people taking advantage of it, there's people tripling, doubling down, I know they're out there, you're going to have committees formed to try to find them, and it's going to go crazy. And this is what happened. Who remembers the welfare queen scenario? I mean, like, this is the narrative that they throw out there on the right. We have to be ready to counter it. And I think that's why, especially in the US, we're so into the idea of universal, because we want to make sure that it's inalienable.
Bold ideas, practical solutions. Our final question goes to you, sir, and then I'm going to ask the panel for a final thought.
Thank you very much. A couple questions, so just bear with me. First and foremost, for someone who's, I guess, trying to learn a bit more about basic income, I'd love to hear a bit about some of the major studies that maybe we can look at, some of the most up-to-date research, and if you could sort of give us some recommendations for that. Secondly, I know that the sentiment on the stage has been that there's an opposition to incrementalism, but I wonder if, just given the reality of the political reality of what we live in here in this country, if there could be an approach whereby, you know, a municipality sort of championed basic income, what would that look like? You know, take for instance the city of Toronto, which generates a fifth of our country's GDP. So I wonder how can that be manifested? Is that within the municipality's capacity, or is it something that would have to require municipalities sort of to go to the provincial and federal governments as well? And lastly, just a question about the methodology. So I'm somewhat sort of still learning this a bit this topic, but is there a measure by which a person receiving basic income has to sort of, just like a person on Ontario Works or something like that, has to check in or notify? Is there some way of reporting on the utility or the use of the funds?
Great questions. We happen to have the longest serving mayor of Toronto sitting right here. I think you might have an idea about the municipal option.
Well, I talked about the replacement of welfare earlier. Welfare is a provincial responsibility. There is some administration that was on at the local level that the city is involved with, but it's on behalf of the province, which pays the biggest part of they pay about 80% of the bill. So the city couldn't do it on its own. Provinces might be able to. Ontario is doing this pilot on their own, not with the federal government. But I would much prefer a national program. But we could have it start at province. Remember how Medicare started? It started in Saskatchewan. It started with a province, and then it went national. So I think that's where our focus should be at the moment. I can't remember, you had another part of your question?
A question about resources and
Oh,
studies.
listen, read her book. Okay, I got it. Town Without Poverty. Town with No Poverty, all about the Mincome experience in Manitoba, about Dauphin, Manitoba. You can also talk to Ron Eggleton here. He ran the program, this guy down here. And you can also read Professor Bodway's book, is How We Might Change the Tax System to Fund This. That's out of Queen's University in Kingston. And also out of the University of Manitoba. Well, you've got at least a couple of people that have written things there. So there are some, you should see.
Sheila, I'm missing your website.
She'll tell you what other things you can read. And she's got a new book, I think.
I just thought Sheila's been waiting here for a moment.
Yeah,
Senator, go ahead.
Best place to start, Basic Income Canada Network, NABIG, Basic Income Earth Network at the international level, all have an incredible wealth of resources on their websites, produced by amazing people. There are so many people in this room who are writing and contributing articles and producing research. It's just exploding. One of the very best places to start, though, humbly, is Basic Income Canada Network has a new primer series. They're a short series of documents. The first couple are 4 pages long, the rest are only 2 pages long, but they give you a quick overview of everything you really need to know to be able to be part of this conversation and to understand all of the other things you're reading. And one of this particularly about the Canadian context, so you understand, you know, kind of the world in which we're working. But there are so many resources out there, and it's growing.
Wonderful. Evelyn, did you want to add to the resource question?
Well, as for resources, I mean, this conference is a great place to start. You're
in the right place.
But I did want to say something about the municipalities. There is a movement in the U.S., I think, supported
The expectation, so nobody gets upset. If you didn't get your question answered before 9 o'clock, and I'm going to give the panel some closing comment time, you can always come up to the panel for a few minutes after and pose your question. So Courtney, are you next up? All right.
Hi. That's loud. To quickly just cap what you said, I'm working on a project where we interviewed hundreds of people around the country, asking them what they do with the basic income, and 99%, or the ones who weren't joking, had a great answer for what they would do, and about 50–60% were worried about what other people would do. So there's a disconnect between what people think of themselves and others, is what I got. But my question, I want to take it back to the universality, unconditionality thing a little bit, because it seemed like the consensus from the Canadians on the panel was there's a political issue with strict universality. Like, why would we give, I'm American, so I'll use American things. Why would we give Bill Gates $12,000 a year? That sort of thing. And Evelyn, you mentioned the scope of government. People are worried about the scope of government. But the thing, when I think about actual implementation, what confuses me is if you're talking about income testing, then it seems to me that that has to be done on an ongoing, rolling basis, and people have to be reporting their income. Whereas taxation can be done on an ongoing basis without people reporting it. It's taken from a check. So it seems to me that if you have a guaranteed minimum income that's a top-off, that's always changing, there's a lag in the time it takes to get it, which can hurt people. And it seems to me if you design it as a floor that's universal for everyone, then it becomes very small bureaucracy because it's just coding. You give everyone the same. There's no one to find out to determine who has what income and deliver it. And then if you tax it out of the back end, you still end up with that same situation if you have like a 10% income tax.
Can I ask your question to the panel? Because I know they're...
So my question is, if the price would be the same on the end and the wealthy would still be paying for it, why is that not worth more efficiently?
I didn't say scope of government, I said scale of government. I think that Canadians are a lot more worried about the size of the tax revenue and the size of government expenditure than they are about what it is the government does. And I don't think that there's a concern about reporting your income. I mean, I see it happening anonymously through the tax system or a tax-like system where it would happen, and we do it regularly when we pay our income taxes, when we do everything else. So I don't see that being an
So
issue.
do you find the scale of government as the amount of money or the number of people in it? Because it seems to me you would need less people.
Amount of money. And we're talking about doubling the size of the federal government spend if we do that. Doubling the size of the federal government spend and doubling tax revenue in order to support it, something along that range. And that's just like not on.
So Senator and then Sheila?
Well, I think also inequality is an issue here. You know, you're not exactly closing the gap if you're giving it to everybody, the rich and the poor, and the focus, I think, in this country needs to be on lifting people out of poverty. And we're talking about using the income tax system. We already do have, well, for example, on a sales tax, GST or HST, we already do have a program whereby quarterly there's a payout for people who don't pay income taxes or are eligible for the rebate for low-income people. They do get checks now. They do get payback from the tax authority. So that would work the same way here. And if they're below the poverty line, or whatever the line is that is set to bring people up to, then they would get a check back. Instead of giving a check to the government for taxes, they would get a check back from the government. So it will all work within the income tax system, all of which is between the system and people, just like all our taxes are.
Thank you. Sheila, did you want to weigh in? Then we'll get to our next question.
Just a plug to talk to Courtney standing beside you and watch for BICN's work coming up looking at various policy options that address a number of these issues and look at like why one option might be preferable to others for some people and
that's a great resource.
And how it all works out.
Keith?
One thing that proponents of universality, and I heard many times, they don't believe it. They always believe that basically the administrative savings will pay a very large chunk of it. There's not that much to be recouped. And the study actually from the CCPA demonstrated that the cost actually, and actually no, it was the Fraser Institute that did that by looking at all the expenses or all the, how much the support programs cost in administration provincially and federally. And it's a few billions. We're talking about maybe 10, 11 billions as a whole. If you're going to give, say, $15,000 to each Canadian, that will amount to about 550 billion. As I said, current budget is 290. So 550 billion is basically 1/4 of GDP in this country. Now, we know that some money will be recouped with tax systems, some money will be, if we're scrapping all social programs, we can recoup all of that. Administrative savings will be included in this. But even taking into account everything that we can scrape, to fund a universal basic income system in the country, there will still be a need to find 160 to 200 billion. So we'll need to increase taxes by at least 60, maybe probably even more to actually get to that level. And then the question that will come is, why are we doing all that redesigning of Canada's fabric to, in the end, try to give money to people who have money?
So you don't miss people.
You know what?
And there's ways that you can actually amend and change the system. Let's talk to about someone who is earning, say, $40,000, and that person loses their job, fall to nothing. You don't need to wait until the next tax system to get something. You can actually have a system of offices, such as we have for EI, employment insurance, that will ensure that you can go there and start getting your check monthly to actually get you to that level. You can do it. You can actually, and it's a matter of political will to ensure that governments will go and find people who are homeless, don't have a street address, to register them. We don't do it right now because there's no political will to do it. We can do it. We don't need to actually have a program that will be, honestly, politically unsellable to get to that point. You can do it by managing well and convincing people that it can be done locally.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. We can take two more before we're done tonight, so set yourself up for that. Go ahead.
I'm Roberta Hamilton from the Kingston Action Group, and for 4 years now we've been meeting every month, and we are really, the question I'd really like to ask Guy Caron and Senator Eggleton in particular is this question of how do we build political will? In my group, we go around to service clubs and churches and everything. But then there's the other way of trying to convince people who do have political power that they should do something, that they want their name in neon lights. We got Medicare partly because Justice Emmett Hall went around the country and said, gee, I was wrong, we really do need Medicare. And the Prime Minister was willing to do it. So do we build it by building a social movement, which seems to be a good idea with the women's movement? It happened in 10 years. In 10 years, there was all this change. But how should we put our energies? Should we be lobbying people who are already in power? Should we be trying to build a grassroots movement? Of course, two would be, that's my question.
Great question. Let's go to our politician.
Well, one kind of simple idea would be to
foundation to get cities thinking about some kind of a basic income. So, I mean, there are towns. I mean, it's partly modeled on the notion of Oakland and Stockton and the experiments that are taking place there. But there are a whole lot of mayors and city councilors who are talking about that. And I don't know enough about the US context to know how that differs from Canada and why that might be feasible in a way in the US that it probably wouldn't be here.
So thank you everyone for your questions. What I want to do to end this on time here tonight is to challenge our panelists who have already answered some very challenging questions to stick to 30 seconds, which is hard for a politician in particular. So think about it. You got time to prepare. I come from the world of TV. 30 seconds is 30 seconds. I want you to think for a moment, if you had 30 seconds, to inspire this audience with a message of hope or a takeaway next step or the one thing you would do, just something that we can walk away with to feel empowered, because we've heard a lot of obstacles and a lot of complexities and a lot of details, but we have an audience here who also wants to walk out and make a real difference on the issue. So who's brave enough to go first with the 30-second recap of some hope?
I'll go first. I also just wanted to touch on studies, and I'm going to go on 30 seconds as I know, but I think that studies, especially in the US, could be used perversely, and I'm very cautious of them. I like how they're bringing awareness, but I'm extremely cautious. There was a conservative who was looking at some of these studies going, oh, well, when women get this basic income, they leave their husbands. We can't have that. I mean, this is really, we have to be very aware of that. And I think, like, look at a city like Baltimore, we know we need a basic income. It's beyond time to have a basic income. And I also want to point out that, I think this, for me, one of the reasons I'm so keen in on this issue, and this is my personal take, is that it's because under capitalism, if you do not generate money, you are of no worth to society. And in Baltimore, there is no greater place when you see that playing out. So, I mean, literally, people are being thrown away. There's plans for gentrification like no one would believe, because they're starting to see all poor people as criminals or potential criminals. It's just sadness after sadness over there. So I really want to make sure that we, I'm trying to leave an inspiring message, I'm sorry, I really want to make sure we see this as a human rights issue. And we see this as digging into a part that capitalism is just never going to be able to repair. We're never going to, one of my mentors is Regehr. I don't know if people know him. He writes a book called No More Throwaway People. And right now we are currently still in the model in the US of tossing people away who are not producing. No one should be thrown away. No one should be seen as a criminal just because they're not making enough money. And that's where I think basic income comes into play. Everyone has potential to be the next, God forbid, Donald Trump, but Barack Obama as well. Or Jill Stein, Elizabeth May, if you will. Just for my folks.
Thank you.
All right,
thank you so
much. Thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate it.
Okay, I think I can do this in 30 seconds. And it goes back to Roberta's question about what do we do. From my perspective, you all do what you do best. Like whatever your talent is, whatever your contribution is, and there are so many people doing so many different things, nothing ever gets done by one thing. It becomes stars aligned and, magnitude of effort on all sorts of parts, and suddenly it clicks.
Love it. That was 30 seconds. I'm impressed. Okay, Senator, 30 seconds.
We live in a rich country, and yet we have so much poverty here. 5 million people living in poverty, 4 million people not able to get sufficient, decent housing. How can this happen in this kind of a country? We do have the money we need to be able to correct this problem. We have the kind of program that is now gaining momentum. Let's not let it go. We've got momentum, let's keep the momentum going. Let's make sure that the prosperity we've created in our country is better shared amongst all of our people.
Awesome. Thank you. Well done.
I'm not giving inspiration, but I think we need to remember how far we've come. We need to look at all the progress we've made in the last 3 or 4 years and realize how close we've gotten to this.
It's amazing. And
back in '61, John F. Kennedy said that the US would put a man on the moon. No, it was a man on the moon before the end of the decade. That was basically impossible to think of. At that point, they were so far behind the Soviets. They were able to do it. Think about it. If we were implementing basic income in this country to ensure that everybody would be raised to at least the level of poverty, we would be the first country in the world ever to eliminate poverty. And this is something that basically Caron can provide.